Thanks for tuning in to Know Wine in No Time. I'm your host Dave, and today we're going to talk about aging wine in wooden vessels, and most specifically, oak. So if we look back at the early wine producers of the world, they neither aged nor transported wine in wooden vessels. What they used was clay pots, and those clay pots were called amphora. So it wasn't until the spread of the ancient Roman Empire, as they started to make their way through North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, that they discovered that other civilizations were transporting beverages in wood. And the first thing they encountered was palm wood in the Middle East. But the Romans didn't especially like palm wood because it was very difficult to bend and to turn into basically barrels. But they did uncover a civilization called the Gauls. And the Gauls produced beer, and they stored their beer in oak barrels. And what the Romans said was that these barrels would be much easier to transport because they were less fragile. So they started to put wine in oak barrels, and what they found was that that wine had changed a bit. The wine had become softer. It had a little bit more character to it, and they liked the difference. So that was the beginning of aging wine in oak barrels. Well, today, winemakers continue that tradition because they like the effect that it has on wine. Certainly you could age wine in a multitude of different types of wood, but oak has become the standard. And there's two really different types of oak in the world. So let's make it simple. We have American oak and we have European oak. So American oak could either come from the United States or it could come from Canada. And the difference with American oak versus European oak is the American oak has a pore size that's a little bit larger. So let's think about how oak impacts a wine. What oak does is it imparts oak oil to the wine itself, and it causes that wine to change a little bit. It makes the wine more toasty, more buttery, more caramely, and it changes the wine specifically. So North American oak imparts quicker oak oil because of the pore size of the oak itself. When we look at European oak, we have French oak, we have Slovenian oak, we have Austrian oak. Because the climate's slightly cooler in Europe, that oak has tighter pore size and doesn't impart nearly as much oak oil in as short a period of time. So, when reading a wine label, when looking at a data sheet on a wine bottle, you can understand how much oak is going to be imparted into the wine by looking to see, is it American oak or is it European oak? Now, furthermore, there are different sizes of oak barrels, and this makes a difference. So let's think about surface area. If we have a greater surface area touching the wine itself, we're going to impart more oak flavor into the wine. So in other words, the smaller the vessel, the more oak that's going to be imparted into the wine itself. And there's really three types of wine barrels that are usually the standard when we talk about wine. And the first one is called a barrique. A barrique is basically what anybody would consider to be a barrel. It's 225 liters, and it pretty much is the standard around the world for aging wine, especially if you want to impart a decent amount of oak flavor in a short period of time. Because the barrel houses 225 liters of liquid, there's a little bit more surface area per liter compared to a much larger sized vessel. The second one would be one called a botte. A botte is 400 liters, and it's much, much larger. Now the difference between a barrique and a botte is that usually bottes are used multiple times, where barriques sometimes are used once and never used again. When we look at barriques, if they're used once, that's called new oak. If it's used twice, that's called first pass. Used three times, that's called second pass. So sometimes you do see wines on a data sheet that will say so much aged in new oak, so much aged in first pass, so much aged in second pass. And what they're trying to do is create a balance among the wines themselves. So they'll take and age it in different vessels and then recombine the wine to basically blend very strong oak flavor, lighter oak flavor, and less oak flavor, so it creates a balance. Now back to the bote. Because we have a much larger vessel, we're imparting less oak flavor in a much shorter time period. So when we think about surface area, 400 liters, much bigger than 225 liters, so less area touching the wine itself. And because botes are used multiple times, they eventually become what they call neutral oak, or oak that imparts very little oak oil. The final vessel that we want to talk about is one called a foudre, and the foudre is kind of the king of oak vessels. A foudre is 1,000 liters, so that's an extremely large vessel. That's one that will make about 1,300 bottles of wine, and because the foudres are really large, they really don't impart much oak flavor at all. So when you think about what wine style you like, and whether you like a very toasty, oaky, buttery type of wine, or whether you like something that's a little more crisp and refreshing, you can always look on a wine label or on a data sheet and look at what type of oak was being used, where it came from, and venture to guess exactly how that wine will present itself when it's in your glass. So thanks so much for tuning in. Please tune in next time, and soon you'll know wine in no time.